And welcome everyone to Teachers Talk Live, the podcast for K-12 solutions. I'm Oscar, and I want to thank you for being with us on this for this very important topic. Today we will be talking about African American girls in K-12 education, and particularly the alarming findings by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw and Associates in the study Black Girls Matter, and what we can do to make their situation better, really, so they can thrive in school. We took on we took on this topic we took on this topic at Teachers Talk Live because frankly it is something we haven't heard very much about on a national level. We hear efforts being made to assist African Americans in general, but the focus seems to be on the males. According to the research, black male students are most frequently suspended and likely to receive harsh punishments at school disproportionately. But there is a bigger disparity in punishment between black and white girls than the disparity between black and white boys. In fact, black girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. Black boys, on the other hand, are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white boys. I would like for each of our panelists today to introduce themselves with a short bio, and please tell us from which experience you will draw your expertise to address African American girls in K-12. So let's begin with Vashti. Go ahead and unmute and begin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Vashti Dubois, and I am in Philadelphia. I am the executive director and the founder of a new organization called the Colored Girls Museum. What brought me to doing this particular work is my experience in nonprofit working primarily with women and girls as an executive director for a program called the Girls Center, a center for adjudicated and delinquent girls in North Philadelphia. And this center served young women between the ages of 13 to 17 years of age. It was the last stop before placement in boot camp, and also the step down from boot camp when you were coming from placement. So part of what we did was, in addition to case management, therapy, and all that, we provided a school day. I also worked as the executive director most recently for a program called Treehouse Books, and our mission was to deal with literacy in North Philadelphia among urban youth. So we were looking at young folks between the ages primarily of 1st and 8th grade. And I guess I'll be speaking from both of those perspectives, and also with some insight as to what that looks like for women when the educational system fails, how that impacts caregivers as they attempt to advocate for and navigate the school system on behalf of their daughters.
Nice, welcome. Next up we have
Thank
Michael.
You.
Okay. My name is Michael Washington. I am currently a doctoral student pursuing a PhD in social justice education. The degree is coming from Claremont Graduate University, joint with San Diego State. The emphasis in social justice for me was to take a look first at studying multicultural education, which is an aspect of K-12, looking at first starting with the broad perspective and eventually narrowing down specifically to specializing in post-secondary issues specific to black males. But on that journey, I've conducted studies and taken coursework and worked primarily in alternative education as a substitute teacher, K-12 substitute, teaching career and technical education, which involves adult learning theory, but also utilizing critical pedagogy and culturally relevant pedagogy when I was working as a substitute teacher. So a lot of my research now specializes in black males, but in order for me to study black males, I also have to understand what differentiates black males from black females. And so I'll be providing you with a perspective based upon some of those differences as they apply to K-12, the miseducation that's going on, some of the gaps that exist, not just the education gap or academic gap or graduation gaps. We're also talking about opportunity gaps, and in this case, gender.
Nice. So welcome. Glad
Thank
to
you.
have you. Felicia? Go ahead.
Okay. Great evening, everyone. My name is Felicia Meadows. I am a school counselor. I've been in the field of education for this year will be 20 years. And I always jokingly tell people I know I don't look a day over 25, but yes, I've been doing this for 20 years now. And I've worked at every level from all the way from elementary through secondary through high school. So I'm in the trenches every day with these babies. And in addition to having 3 black girls of my own, I have 3 daughters. I too, as you can see, was a black girl. So that's my. So I've had the experience from a personal perspective, and also someone who's in the trenches and sees what happens in our schools every day with our young ladies. In 2013, I founded Tomorrow's Future Coaching and Consulting, which was really geared around coaching and bringing career awareness, cultural awareness, character education to our young people. And what I found is most of the organizations that were reaching out to me were girl organizations. I was the whole, boys, girls, whoever can benefit. But I've really been working with girls, and I said that is what I'm supposed to be gifted to do, is work with these young ladies to help them become the young women that I know that they can be. After seeing them every day, talking to girls every day, dealing with girls every day, and seeing how the societal impact and the lack of positive role models impacts who they see themselves as young women. So I bring a multifaceted perspective, me as once being a black girl, being the mother to 3 black girls, and being in the school system for which I work is predominantly black. So that's the perspective and the area that I'm coming from.
Welcome. And Camille? And if you could unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, you're muted again.
Good evening. I'm Camille Earl Dennis. Started my career actually in Newark, New Jersey. I'm currently residing in South Florida. And my perspectives this evening are come from growing up as a Caribbean woman of color here in South Florida. I'm migrating here from the West Indies. And also as an educator in Newark, New Jersey, working with middle schoolers and high schoolers, specifically with our African American girls and males, and looking specifically at how we are viewed in media and society, and how that affects our perceptions of how we see ourselves, how the world sees us, and how that affects us and our learning. Currently, I serve as a consultant in urban education, working with leaders and teachers in and outside of their classrooms with brain-based learning and self-actualization, helping teachers transform themselves and self-actualize to be able to address the needs of their students in the classrooms and help them also reach self-actualization.
Nice. Quite a panel we have today, so I can't wait to get started. One of the very first questions that I want to ask you is, I'm particularly interested in this Black Girls Matter study because it seems to be really eye-opening. And when I'm interested in when you read it, what particular things stuck out at you? What were some of the aha moments? And this goes to anybody. Anybody can begin. So go ahead, somebody.
Well, I want to second the motion. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. One, an only girl with four brothers. I went to public school for 7 years before I went, before I got a scholarship to private school, which was a whole other story. But, I, as an adult, have been struck in many ways by the treatment of girls, particularly in public education spaces. And when I read the report, and I was thinking about this today because I was coming from working, doing a literacy program with kindergarten and first grade girls. I think the thing that stuck out, because I always think about it, is there's a quote: girls' attachment and sense of belonging in school can be undermined if their achievements are overlooked and undervalued. And, it wasn't an aha moment for me because I don't know it. It was an aha moment for me because it's something that that's a significant factor, I think, in how African American girls at a young age become, in some ways, invisible in these public spaces, because that particular issue is an issue that impacts grown women, but it starts with young women. And I think when we talk about when we do this comparison between Black boys and Black girls, certainly when I was in school, what was true then is true now. Very often, Black girls in the classroom are actually overlooked, and the argument is that they are okay. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing now is that Black girls have been overlooked for so long, and I certainly saw this at the Girls Center, that and I don't mean to simplify this, but one way of gaining some attention for yourself is, quite frankly, to act out. The acting out is both a result of being ignored, I think, and also a response, as the quote says, to just, to really being made invisible in the space. So when I read that, like I said, I was not surprised by it. I was and continue to be saddened by the lengths that I think, Black girls have to go to in order to get the attention and the concern that they richly deserve, which is one of the reasons I'm doing what I do now. So that was as close to an aha moment, I guess, as I had.
That really surprises me. That definitely strikes a chord with me with what you said in the study, because being a Hispanic male myself and being an immigrant to this country, and starting in the 6th grade, I dealt with my own kind of challenges in education. But as a kid, you don't put yourself outside of yourself that way to see what's happening to someone else. And so that was my experience, being a Hispanic male in a mostly Anglo atmosphere where I was at. And so yeah, you don't think of this, and even as a teacher, my experience as a teacher has been working with Hispanics. That has been it. I have had one African American student and one Anglo student in my 15 plus years of in education, and so I've never had to put myself in that place and think of specifically black girls in K-12, and so
Right.
I think that's one of the perspectives, and most of you from on your end, you've lived it, you've lived the experience of either being an African American girl in K-12 or being an African American in K-12, which brings um, another level of challenges. But I've, what do you think of that? What do you think of as far as um, how other people might see this issue? How do I guess I'm jumping to another question, and we can come back to this. But how do you see that people might view the challenges going on with African American girls?
Well, I'll jump in really quickly.
Sure.
And I said before, I don't want to say I'm a little biased, but I guess I'll have to say that because the school district for which I work and where I grew up and from which I graduated, I work for the same district from which I graduated.
Oh wow.
Our county, I'm in the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. We are, if anyone knows about Prince George's County, we are the wealthiest, most affluent African American community in the nation. So the county for which I work is predominantly black. Even though those demographics are changing, we now have a high number of Hispanic families coming into the county and Hispanic children. So in the school for which I work now is about, I would say about 55% Hispanic and 45% African American. So having been in the county for as long as I've been in, I've seen a shift and a change in the demographics. However, when we look at the discipline, that was something that I was thinking about, and as having been a multicultural teacher for my building before, looking at the statistics for discipline, when we think about what infractions are our young people being accused of, it varies by race, and it also varies by gender. So for African American girls, it's disrespect and insubordination. For African American boys, it's usually insubordination and loitering. So when you look at the disrespect and insubordination, if I'm being taught, and even though we have a kind of multicultural teaching force, but if I'm being taught by someone who doesn't look like me or who doesn't understand me or doesn't get where I'm coming from, it's a little harder for me to respect you because you don't understand me. So I see that a lot with the young ladies. Is in this new culture too. Overall, this new thing, with if you don't respect me, I don't respect you. And if you don't look like me, and you don't talk like me, and you don't act like me, then I'm really not going to respect you. So having that conversation and having that shift, not with the adults, but also with the young people to help them understand what respect, because respect to them now is a whole different conversation that we used to have when we were coming up. Respect is this whole new thing for them.
It's about power now.
Yeah, and it's not about
be.
mutual anything. It's about, how can I control the situation, because
Right.
you're trying to control me and I need to nip that in the bud. But you're 12 or you're 13, so you have a little bit more maturing and growing to do. So it's having those conversations, and quite often I see where you think female to female somehow we'd be able to relate, but I even see non-African American female teachers not knowing how to deal with our girls. They just don't. She always has an attitude or she's talking back, but there's a way that you can develop that relationship and rapport that I don't think is being done to benefit our girls.
That's really interesting insight, and I want to talk more about that because I think that's really important for the general public, especially. The whole point that you brought up, Felicia, of if I look different,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not African American, if I'm not female, if I don't come from the same background that you do, then you won't trust me, you
Mm-hmm.
won't respect me. how, so I want to explore that further. Like, how do we cross that bridge? How do we meet?
Can I
Yes,
chime in on
please,
that?
please, please.
Um, First of all, as the only male speaking, I think I have an
Now,
interesting
wait a minute.
perspective. Well, as the only male guest, okay, you're the moderator, okay. So let's make this clear. Yeah, there's two fellas here, so let me clarify that. As the only male guest on
Yes.
your podcast.
Thank
All
you.
right, so now that I've clarified that, checks in the mail. Um, I think that I think I have a perspective that's kind of interesting because most people would think that I don't really have an understanding. But here's the thing, I do, but I can never have an understanding as a woman. But I do have an understanding as an educator and as an African American. So I'm also a researcher. So a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about is based upon some of what the research says in combination with my experiences and feedback that I've gotten from students and other educators. So a couple of things, like it's interesting that we're talking about identity issues. I'm trying to keep this short. I know I'm going to have to come back with some other responses, but um, like we're saying the word female and we're talking about things related to identity. One of the things that I've taught some of my male students is they don't call themselves males, they call themselves men, but they call women female. So I usually say something like, well, female what? Cat, chicken, dog, bird, because when you say woman, you're talking about a human. When you say female, you don't specify that. And they say, well, what's the big deal? I said, there's a major difference when you start thinking about how you treat people, because part of the reason we can dehumanize people is because of how we identify them. And women not only have to contend, I mean, African American women not only have to contend with being black and discriminatory practices, they also have to contend with also sometimes being devalued within our own race or culture by things like being called females and being over-sexualized or being labeled the angry black woman. And those are some of the things that also play into their identity. If they speak up for their concerns, then they're labeled angry. If they don't, then they're labeled permissive. And there seems to be almost no balance or no gap in there. Not only that, but in education, when we start looking at what affects all blacks in general, access to GATE classes or AP classes, um, uh, the women have the same issues that the males do. But the difference is, what I find interesting is once they leave high school, black women are some of the most successful group as a demographic in post-secondary education. More black women, they're kicking butt. They're killing it in college. So I think part of the reason, now this is a theory based upon some of the research, part of the theory is that they're doing so well in education because of all the challenges that they've had to face in secondary and primary education, because in many cases they have to really get serious right away. In many of these relationships, because we're not just talking about how they're treated by the overall society, we're also talking about how we're treated within our own culture, and those things sometimes contribute to it. So I'm not putting black males down. What I'm saying is there's a different dynamic and issues that are faced between these genders. I'm pretty sure these ladies will agree with me. So when you start talking about identity issues, there's issues of identity. When you're talking about suspension rates because of zero tolerance, part of the reason that black women are suspended more is because, not so much because of their race, even though that's always an issue, but also because they're women. It's like, well, you're a woman, you're not supposed to be aggressive for you, as opposed to men, where you're expected to be aggressive, just don't be black and be aggressive. So I think those are things that we need to take a look at with the dynamics. We're talking about intercultural issues and we're talking about societal issues. They actually have places where they cross. And so there's other things that I'll be bringing up, but those are things that have to be considered, is how they're viewed by society, how they're viewed within their own culture, and the fact that because they have children, many of these are told, well, you're going to be, a good wife or a good, good mother. So why can't I just be a good woman? And whereas that's not placed on men. That's placed on women all the time.
I have I have a thought with what you're saying, Michael. I want to ask a general question. How 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 much is the feminism movement affecting altogether? Not necessarily just African American, but just the feminism movement. How much impact do you think that's having? Not anybody.
Mm.
I think it has some influence, but and I'll be brief. I think it has some influence, but I think a lot of people forget that the feminist movement was born out of the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement came from what African Americans were trying to do in terms of changing policies and laws and treatment overall, especially starting in the South. So the feminist movement does contribute, but the feminist movement comes full circle. The feminist movement was born out of the civil rights movement. So go ahead, ladies.
That's
Well, first of all, I was going to say that I'm sure that we're all aware that many African American women take some umbrage to the feminist movement, which is why we have other terminology like womanism and the womanist movement. So there is that.
Yes.
But in terms of how it relates to what we're talking about, I think there's, frankly, I actually think there's little bearing. You know, to your point, Michael, what I was going to say before is that this idea of respect is something that we really have to be thoughtful about, because what I've seen is that and I see it in myself. I have a 27-year-old daughter, and this was certainly a challenge for us and for her. She has a particular way of presenting herself, frankly, a way I've trained her to be. And what I find with many Black girls is that, and this happens in the workplace, this happens in school, this happens everywhere. People
Yes.
really have an issue with Black women and Black girls speaking up for themselves, articulating themselves in a certain way, asking questions, and people also misread because it's, we have our own cultural affect. So whereas many people will say, oh, Black girls have an attitude, lots of times, Black girls are just minding their own business. They don't have an attitude. That, if you can't figure out how to navigate, a Black woman or a Black girl, then all of a sudden it's difficult. All of a sudden she's difficult. She's making things hard for you. She's aggressive. She's assertive. She's a problem. And what I have found is that, and I find it in myself, that is just, it's another way of forcing a certain kind of invisibility on Black women and Black girls. And it's just, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. I can agree. I agree.
Because if we don't speak up for ourselves, there's really nobody else to speak up for us.
Go ahead.
I wanted to just quickly mention Black feminist Bell Hooks. She's a educator and professor at Harvard. Her first work, Ain't I a Woman, came out, I think, in the early 1980s, discussing Black women and feminism. But her most recent work, talking about educating our African American girls in the classroom, teaching to transgress. She discusses the importance of building relationships with our young ladies and finding ways to help them change how they see themselves. And she discusses the role of self-actualization and Maslow and hierarchy of needs, and how our young ladies are battling with the basic human needs of safety, feeling safe in their classrooms, feeling safe in their environment, which is one of the issues in our study that we read, and creating that safety within classrooms. And one major point that she speaks about as a Black feminist is the idea that we as educators have to first go through that process ourselves. We have to know how we're seen in media, how our girls are seen in media, and help to change those perceptions for them through the enhancement of our existing curriculum. And if our girls don't have a basic human needs of a sense of belonging or feeling of safety in classrooms, then of course they're acting out in ways. And specifically, five ways that our girls are seen, and we as women in society are as baby mamas is the first one. In Essence did this study recently, finding that only 41% of us actually see ourselves as beautiful based on media representation of the, as I mentioned, baby mamas. The second one being as gold diggers, uneducated, and of course angry, and then Jezebels. Very provocative. And these are the images that are being presented to our young ladies, and we have to find ways to make that shift, to not only help recognize this is the way that we're being seen, this is not the way we should be seen, and giving them positive examples of what it is that they should be looking towards.
So how do we do that? How do we give them positive examples? All this stuff that you're talking about, Camille, it brings up names for me of people in pop culture, and it makes me think,
Yeah.
wow, yeah, that's what they're seeing. That's what they're seeing, and that's exactly the message that they're sending. Some of the pop stars that are out there, they're saying exactly that. You know, get your money. You can do certain things as long as you get paid for it.
Oh, please don't get me started. Please don't get me started.
But you see, that's who they look up to. That's who they aspire to be. Why? Because they have money. They have influence.
But that has to do with values.
Right.
Now, so if I may, well, I'm the last person to tell someone what their values should be. Okay, because I mean, mine isn't so perfect. I think we're all a work in progress. But here's the thing: your values are based on so many different things that you're always going to have some group that's going to question your values. Some people have Christian values. Some people have Muslim values. Some people have Southern roots, and those values are different. So, I mean, all these values are different. I mean, as you get older, your values change. You have a tendency to become more conservative. Also, your values, to some degree, are based upon the privileges or freedoms as well as the restrictions and discriminatory practices that affect you, and those things shape your values. So when we start talking about what it is that girls in K-12 tend to emulate, well, the first thing I think is what they have access to. When you start talking about pop stars, there's constant access to TV, movies. I mean, between our smartphones, our laptops, our TVs, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, we have all this information that instantly provides whatever's going on in pop culture, which is primarily free. So you're going to have more people who know what Beyonce is saying than what Gloria Ladson-Billings is saying, and for good reason. Gloria Ladson-Billings may have a very important message about being culturally relevant, but she can't compare her audience to Beyonce, who is going to be invited to the Super Bowl. So we have to take a look at trying to instill, I'm not going to say values, but at least try and make sure that we shape influences, make sure that they understand who they are. When we're talking about providing education, we're not just talking about instilling pride and historically accurate information to African American women and girls. We're also talking about making sure we educate the rest of the world so that they also have a better idea of what we're capable of. So as we all develop, we're educating both sides. We get pride in it because a lot of times we know some of this stuff anyway, but a lot of them don't. We make the assumption, don't you know your history? And I mean, other than Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and slavery, a lot of people don't. So
well, we don't because we have consistently prioritized the achievements of others, whether they're African American men, white women, and what we've not done is prioritized the achievements and the accomplishments and the challenges of African American women. We're talking about education here, and one of the things that I always feel like I have to say is we do talk about our young women as though the majority of our young women are all want to be Beyonce or Rihanna, and you know what? I work in the schools. It's not true. It's just not true. It's not that they are aware. Certainly they know pop culture. None of us can get away from it. But
True.
they also, because they have families and they come from communities, and we all work really hard to provide other opportunities. Now, the world, may be very interested in giving us reality TV images of ourselves, in giving us video images of ourselves. But as a parent of 3 children, one of whom happens to be a daughter, I work tirelessly, as I do with the young women that I engage with in educational and cultural situations. And I got to speak for those of us who, we're not. I want to push back against this narrative that Black women and Black girls are in peril. We are underappreciated. We are, yes, undereducated in these public spaces in some really important ways. But most importantly, the world is grossly undereducated about the accomplishments, the achievement, and the power of Black women and Black girls. I think Black girls are really actually phenomenal.
So do I. So do I. So
Agreed.
do I.
I have a question from Amanda Haas, who's listening in, and she says, how can teachers help expose students to positive role models in a way that might influence the way they feel about themselves? Or is it what we do in the classroom even enough to influence values?
Felicia, baby.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I can say about that. So, and my wheels were spinning as you were talking. Well, there's several things that could be done. And just listening to the conversation, like I said, because I'm in the trenches every day and I see the influence that society has and the lack of positive Black, women role models for our girls and our young ladies. I just see it. And then when I have conversations with them about, well, why do you want to emulate these people? Oh, it's funny. It's hilarious. And I said, well, if you see adult women behaving the same way that you behave, it looks kind of crazy, right? And they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. So and I'm not saying, because it's not, it's not the majority of what's happening, but it's happening enough out here where to me it's a concern. But we're not combating the negative stereotypes with something positive. And if young people, period, if our babies see people that look like them, that they can relate to, that who is not an athlete or rap artist, whatever these people are doing out here, because a lot of them are not role models. See people who look like them, who they can relate to. I done workshops around creating goals with young ladies, creating SMART goals. And examples that I use were like your Misty Copelands, your Michelle Obamas, Serena Williams, even your Gabby Douglases. People who are your age who are doing the thing. They're doing it. And, you can do that too. You don't have to emulate the negativity. There are young people out here that are really doing something phenomenal. But they have to see those images. They have to hear those stories. They have to be exposed to those people. And I know with all the things that teachers have to do in the classroom, because there's a whole lot of stuff that they're required to do, this foolishness, but they have to be able to, put some things in there to help our babies see people who look like them, who are successful, who are not dribbling the basketball or gyrating on stage. And we have to have constant reminders. And, I had this conversation, this was years ago, with some of my students. We were talking about some African-American, activists, leaders, and things like that. And I'm asking them about, not your Martin Luther King Jr.'s, because everybody knows who he is, but we were having conversations about other leaders. And they were looking at me like, what are you talking about? And then I said, I had to stop and I had to apologize to them, because I said, you know what, it's our generation's fault that you all don't know this. It's our fault because we don't teach this to you anymore. We just let you go to your own devices and hope for the best, and then get upset when you behave a certain way or we don't know certain things. But it's our fault that you don't know. So if we don't expose them and talk to them, have conversations, bring living, breathing people into their environment that they can relate to and they can understand and they can talk to, who are the epitome of success, then that's very beneficial for them. But that's not happening.
I
It's
still,
really not
I still
happening.
hold, I still hold the schools or educational systems accountable for a portion of this. Now, I know you're in the trenches, and again, I can't speak from the female perspective, but from an educational sense, uh, there's been a lot of miseducation.
Hmm.
A lot of schools that are at risk usually have the least qualified teachers working at some of the most challenging
Hmm.
and poor schools, and so as a result, you have people who get burnout. They don't stay, or they may not necessarily have the experience to deal with the population that, in a way, is starving for good
Hmm.
education, and they don't know the difference because they don't really get the opportunities that the educational system is supposed to afford them. It's part of systemic discriminatory practices. This also has to do with funding. It also has to do with a number of things that are systematic. So I agree that there are things that we can do on the individual basis. I agree that we can do in terms of things that we can do in terms of parenting. I think there are things that we obviously can do in terms of community, and all of you are already doing those things, and please continue to do that. You have nothing but my fullest support. But we also need to make it clear that there are also gaps and issues within the systems themselves, because it's not just our generation. I agree that we have a responsibility, but so does the educational system, because we've contributed to history. It's not just black history. Black history is still American history. And so as a result, we need to take a look at how these educational systems don't necessarily include us. We're talking about aspects of inclusion. We're talking about changing curriculum. We're talking about providing cultural um, culturally relevant training for educators so that the suspension rates are lower, or at least more on keel with non-blacks. I would say whites, but it's more than that. It's
Hmm.
also same thing with Asians. And people say, well,
Hmm.
the Asians aren't having those issues. I said that depends on which you're referring to. The Japanese and the Chinese don't, but Hmong and Vietnamese, and they are. So it's not just it's not it's more complex than people realize. So
Hmm.
yeah, I agree that there's responsibility. I'm not going to say finger pointing, but I think the responsibility also lies on the educational system as well as people from our generation. I think there's plenty of blame or responsibility to go around for everybody.
But and that's I hate to say this, but I really kind of, I don't want to say disagree, but the educational system is systematically set up for a lot of our kids to fail. So I don't think that we can put it on the educational system because I don't think that's going to happen. Um,
You don't think it can be changed? I know you obviously you feel
I
it should be, but you don't think it can be?
No, I don't, and I'm going. I really
Okay.
don't. And the
Okay.
reason
All right.
why, I say that is because this has been an argument and a fight for decades. It's
True.
not, it's just been a fight for decades. And if people really want to change what our babies are being exposed to and being presented with, and the truth around our history, it wouldn't take 30, 40 years for that to happen. This has been a conversation that has been ongoing for decades. And some of the curriculum that our babies are being exposed to, was that a couple years ago? I think it was Texas with the um, some craziness in the curriculum, and most recently where slaves were referred to as, what was it? Not servants. It was nothing.
Indentured servants you're referring to?
I don't think it was indentured servants. It was something that helpers. It was something to that effect. Something real crazy. And this was a
They
couple of months
changed the
ago.
word slave to helpers.
Yeah, I think it was helpers or
Yes.
something like that in the curriculum that came up a couple of
Oh,
months
okay.
ago. And then it was this big fight,
Oh
and
yeah.
they changed
Yeah,
the
Texas, yeah.
verbiage. Yeah, but it was like, what? And we're talking about this in 2015, 2016. So
Yeah,
if
that's true.
we're going backwards, if that's the conversation that we're doing, that's what we're putting into the curriculum. No, we're not putting things in there that are telling the truth and helping us understand what's really happened in the past. And I don't think education is ever going to do that. That's just my own personal feeling. Um,
I completely understand where that comes from.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
don't.
but
I'm sorry. I'm just
Go
gonna say,
ahead.
and I don't want to say I'm putting it 100% on parents either, because we're quick to say, well, parents need to be and parents should, and that we all we collectively as a village we need to do a lot more than what we're doing. It's not just a one
Right.
stop shop.
Mhm.
Right.
right to the you know the caller asked about what can an educator do, and yes, systemic institutional racism
Hmm.
you know, can do but so much. An individual educator in the classroom, yes.
Hmm.
Cultural competency is
Yeah.
important. Bringing in literature, bringing in speakers, creating opportunities for your students to learn about contemporary African American history.
Yep.
All of these things make a difference. And yes, it's going to take all of us to make a difference.
Hmm.
Just to answer that particular question, yeah, there are things you can do. There's literature out there. There are people out there who are willing to speak, and you should take advantage of those opportunities to bring those people and those resources into your classrooms.
So, Vasai, specifically, I want to ask you about um, those. Well, and Felicia too, because you brought it up, Felicia. The I kept thinking about, okay, if I gain more respect from a African American student by relating to them.
Mm.
So, what role models can I bring into the classroom? And Felicia, you mentioned Serena Williams, Michelle Obama, and you mentioned some other ones that I don't remember right now. But what other in addition, what other people, what can we study in the classroom
Mm.
if I'm not an African American teacher and I am working with black students, black female students? What can I be doing to bridge that gap?
Well, I think the conversation is kind of twofold, um, because the respect, to me, respect is about relationships. It's not really about culture, in my opinion. It's about forging relationships, because you tend to respect people you have relationships with.
Right.
And it's not really necessarily a cultural thing. If I try to know who you are as a person, no matter what color you are, and we forge a relationship, then we will have a good working either student teacher, teacher teacher, student student relationship, because we have developed a mutual understanding of who we are as people with each other. So that's the respect piece, quote unquote respect, because that's, like I said, newfangled definition. Um, but in terms of non-African American teachers, uh, there should be a plethora of resources on multicultural education. There are ways to celebrate, like every month there's some national something month,
It's
celebrate.
Women's History Month.
Women's History Month.
Women's
Right, it's
History
Women's History
Month.
Month now. And I and probably get slapped on the wrist with the whole Black History Month thing, but I think it's been minimized, so that shouldn't even be a discussion. Black History Month should be every day. Have discussions every day, even if it's we're just talking about 5 minutes in the morning before warm up, or just having general discussions, or even having an open forum in the classroom where, excuse me, young people could express themselves or have conversations around something cultural or something that relates to them. So the adult understands where they're coming from, and they feel that the adult is also hearing and really is caring about what's really going on in their lives outside of the classroom.
Vasai, did you want
Uh, you know, I always say, start where you are, and asking, young people in any setting, one, to talk about and to focus on what is it about who they are as a being, as a cultural being, that there is to be excited about, that there is to be proud about, to ask them to do that work. Because quite frankly, all of the images that we see celebrate other cultures every day. So we actually have to take a step back in our classrooms and provide young people an opportunity to to interview their parents about who they are and where they come from and what they're proud of. Start there. Think about themselves. Because if you begin if someone asks you to think about what is extraordinary about who you are and what your history is, you begin to do that work for yourself. And that work connects you to all of the other wonderful things that we're talking about. This is something that seldom happens in public education space because, quite frankly, folks don't think that, folks don't think that it's worthy. And again, when I talk about respect and culture, what I'm talking about is the belief that you can't, that a young person who you can't relate to is disrespecting you because you don't understand how to relate to them, because you misread their cue, because you actually don't have the communication skills to just communicate with them. Some of our young people do have attitudes, and probably with good reason, but many of them don't have attitudes. There are individuals who simply do not know how to communicate. So when I talk about culture and really being comfortable, bridging these gaps, that's really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the assumptions that the world likes to make. And we need only think about, what was it, 2 summers ago? The sisters who got kicked off the train?
Right.
Laughing while black? Like, did they have an attitude problem? I think not. The folks that were around them were made uncomfortable by their beingness. And this is a lot of what's going on in that report. How uncomfortable folks are around the beingness of black girls. And part of that, which the report also alludes to, has to do with a resilience factor. That black girls shouldn't be happy. The black girls, shouldn't be, shouldn't be outspoken. The black girls shouldn't be proud. That they should be under a rock somewhere. So there's this belief that they should comport themselves in a particular way, based on quote unquote their circumstances.
Jawanza Kunjufu is an author and educator who writes a lot about these issues about African American pride and identity, and how there's challenges. I don't remember the exact title, but one of his books was titled something like "White Middle Class Teachers Teaching Black Students," something of that nature. And a lot of people will bring the question up: are you saying that only black people can empower or teach black people? Now, we may have lots of different views on that, and I'm not sure where you stand. My issue is black people who grew up in similar environments and neighborhoods, who definitely have a shared culture, can relate if they know their culture. But we're also here in 2016 where we have people who don't know their culture, and that's where you get these people who will sometimes say things like, well, you're not acting black, or you're acting white, or these things. And so those have to do with cultural nuances. I agree that it's important to find ways to have people identify their culture, and I think they can be learned and taught by people from different races. But what's most important is we need to be at the forefront of that, and I think in many cases we're not. And I think we need to make sure that we understand that we're also talking about identity. We're not just talking about history. I mean, there's Ella Baker, there's Angela Davis. I mean, Coretta Scott King. Mae Jemison. I mean, there's plenty of role models, but we need to do more than talk about it. We also need to get people to understand that everybody needs to learn this. When we learn it, we do it for the purpose of identifying our history and our culture. When other people learn it, and they should, it's to make sure that they understand that we are a proud people and culture who needs to be identified and respected, and that should be a step towards more equality. I don't know if we'll get there, but let's try it.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, you hit on a very important point, and correct me if I have misunderstood you, but I think one of a really important piece of this has to do with African American, and specifically talking in K-12 education, African American education leaders being in the forefront of educating the teaching community overall on how to specifically address issues with African American girls in K-12,
Yes,
specifically the girls becoming invisible part really gets to me. Go ahead.
that's essentially what I'm saying. I mean, as I said, I'm limited by gender, but I'm not limited in terms of research or education. So I can't say I
Right.
speak for anyone, but other scholars, male and female, and a lot of the research has indicated that a lot of times it's important that those who are, for lack of a better description, oppressed the most
Mm-hmm.
are also the most motivated and therefore tend to make the best leaders. Now, you can't just lead just because of oppression. You have to lead because you're organized, because you have an agenda. You're looking at a bigger picture. And so basically, I think that all educators who support the cause need to go ahead and pick up the flag and contribute. But obviously at the forefront would be us, especially black women. But this is something everybody needs to participate in. We just need to make sure we create the environment. And we've got 5 minutes, so I don't want to get into that. But everybody needs to do this.
And
Everybody.
I would admit myself, I'll tell you real briefly a story that several years back, one of the years that I wasn't teaching full time, I was substitute teaching.
Mhm.
And so I went to this one particular school, and normally I only teach in the K through third or fourth grade. I've never gone higher than that. And so the office called me and said, "Hey, we need to put you in the sixth grade class." And I freaked out. I was like, "No, like I don't know how to deal with that." So I go into this class, and within the first 5 minutes of being in there, this young girl, this African American girl, um, short, small, just seemingly kind girl, all of a sudden was asking me to go to the bathroom like constantly. Like she went to the bathroom once, she came back and sat down and just giggled and just was whispering, and then a couple minutes later asked me again, and then at the third time I said, "Is something the matter?" And she's like, "No, I just gotta go." And I told her no. I
Oh
just
no. We already figured this out. No.
but here's the thing. Here's the thing. Here am I, and me telling you my background in teaching with Hispanic students that look like me.
Mhm.
you know, I I was in that situation, and it's I'm not the only one. It's just that happens to a lot of us because unfortunately there's not enough African American teachers to teach African American students. And so we as non-African Americans, we have to figure out
Mm.
how to interact and how to be able to win the respect of a student. In my case, I was only a substitute teacher, so it's not like I had a relationship with this student. But she shut down immediately, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But anyway, yeah, that's my interest to figure out, what can other teachers do?
Well, one of the best ways to get someone's respect, I'm not saying it always works, is show you care.
Right.
Once students, especially the younger they are, the more they know that you care, the more that they'll, I guess for lack of a better term, trust you, or at least, if not trust, at least invest. But that takes time.
Right.
These
And
ladies know that. I mean, they're in the trenches. They're doing it. They know that better than I do.
right.
But I think too the other thing, and it just crossed my mind after Michael said it. None of us wants to be embarrassed. even as adults. When people call you out or you're embarrassed or, you know, you're yelled at or reprimanded, that's embarrassing.
Right.
So, you know, in any capacity. And what I've just found over the years, then, you know, just a little tidbit too, I've also was a product of an educator and grew up around educators, so I kind of naturally just fit into the role. But one thing that has always worked for me, even I was just thinking when you're talking about the bathroom situation, when she shut down, even if I didn't know that young lady, I would have said, "Come here, come, let's have a little conversation in private. What's going on?"
Mm-hmm.
You know, because then kids understand. You know, because you can always say, "Okay, something else is going on," but I'm not going to call you out in front of your peers because that's a no-win
Right.
situation.
Right.
That's
Right.
never a win situation.
Yeah.
That's trust again.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's really about even the quote unquote respect. It's
Right.
Right.
I'm trying to forge a relationship.
Right.
I'm showing that I care. I'm showing that I really want to know what's happening because something else is going on. I'm not quite sure what it is, but let's find out what's going on so we can get along for this next 30 minutes or however long I have to deal
Yeah.
with you because it's really just about showing that you really, you know, care and that you're open. And I'm not putting you on, like kids say, putting you on blast in
Right.
front of everybody because
Right.
none of us want to be embarrassed,
Right.
even as adults. You know,
Right.
it's not a good feeling. So,
And kids are good BS detectors. They
yes,
know if you're sincere or not.
yes,
Yeah.
sincerity is, yep.
Mhm. That's right.
So I want to be respectful of your time. I had one more question, but it totally has slipped my mind. But what I want to do at this point is go around and if you could give me your final thoughts on this topic specifically, your you know, and tell me about, you know, other teachers. What can other teachers do as well? So let's start with Camille.
Okay, in terms of creating opportunities in the classroom, opportunities for students to see themselves through stories. I know that panelists talked about literature, bringing persons in. One thing that we've always done and continue to do is make sure that students hear persons' stories, their struggles, their triumphs, and how they reach success. We hear about successes, but we don't know how
Mm-hmm.
persons came to those successes. And we go to the community first and find persons who are from our students' communities so that they can relate because they have to see that connection, to see that if that person did it, I can do it as well. And just quickly, in terms of curriculum, it's our responsibility to find the tools that can reach our students. And when we speak about culture, the National Urban Alliance for Effective Education defines culture as whatever is meaningful and relevant to you. So we have to find out what is meaningful and relevant to our students. And using video and music as text is one way to also reach students. And that can be utilized to enhance the existing curriculum.
Wonderful. And Camille, how can people get a hold of you? By the way, I'm going to be putting your information in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get a hold of you and get more information.
Sure. Currently, our website, koyabaconsultinggroup.com, it's being revamped right now. It's still up momentarily, but it will be down soon. Also through email, Koyaba Consulting, COYABA Consulting @gmail.com.
Great.
Or okay.
Oh, go ahead.
And telephone is 305-323-8543.
Thank you. And Felicia?
Final thoughts. One thing that I would strongly encourage educators to do is continuously get educated. There are a plethora of courses you can take on multiculturalism. I myself, like I said, in the last 2 or 3 years, I'm in a completely different environment. I went from a like 95% African American environment to a 55%, 65% Hispanic environment, and I said to myself, I have to understand the culture. I need to because it was a culture shock for me. So we have to understand the cultures with which we work or with whom we work. So always staying educated and being able to relate. And again, it's about building relationships. Everything in life is about building relationships and being open-minded and being willing to learn. It is a process, being willing to learn and understand as you go along and just being open to the process. In terms of reaching me, I am on Facebook at Felicia Meadows. In parentheses, Step Up Your Life. Facebook booted my name out, so I had to shift to that. But it's Felicia Meadows. I'm on Twitter at Felicia G Meadows. If someone wants to email me, it's Felicia, just with 2 I's, Felicia.stepupyourlife@gmail. And unfortunately, with my website was hacked, so in the process of getting that rebuilt. But if someone wants to reach out to me, Facebook or Twitter or email is fine.
Great, thanks. And Michael?
My, I guess, final thoughts on options or suggestions to try and address this. Part of my background has to do with looking at this from a systematic standpoint. I completely agree with Felicia that it has to do with people continuing their education. I completely agree that it has to do with making sure that you have people who are sincere and who care. I guess part of what I do and what I'm interested in reference to this is to try and address it from a systematic standpoint. I mean, obviously we know about the inequities of several of these education systems, but one of the things that they're constantly worried about is the numbers. Do the numbers look good? If the numbers look bad, nobody wants to have these bad numbers that show these differences and these gaps, these demographics. There's plenty of research and data out there that shows what the problem is. What we need is to get in more administrators, superintendents, show them how these changes within the system can actually save them money and raise their numbers. And there's ways to do that. But there has to be proposals, and there have to be people who are willing to get funding or willing to go ahead and work together as a group to come together, conduct either a study or use studies that are already out there and present that to administrators and superintendents of school districts who are interested in changing their numbers, which in turn makes them look good and saves them money. So I think that's the overall approach that needs to also be at least attempted. It's already been done in some places, but not on a large scale. It needs to happen ultimately. It's part of what Obama was talking about in terms of his education program. It's taking No Child Left Behind and revamping it the way it was originally constructed or thought of when it came out. We're talking about the difference between ideas and implementations. Now, as far as how to reach me, I'm currently an adjunct professor at California State University, Sacramento. I can be reached at michael.washington at csus.edu. I am affiliated with their educational leadership program, where we emphasize multiculturalism, as well as working as an instructor in their continuing education program. I can also be reached at my personal email address, michael@themix.com with 2 X's. That's themix, THEMIXX.com. Those are the 2 best ways to reach me, and I also want to give accolades and respect to the ladies who have spoken here today. Like I said, they're in the trenches. I'm just making a contribution. I applaud you, and as they say, props to you.
Yes. And Vashti? Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry. Vashti, you're on mute.
Mike.
There we go.
All right. So the first thing I just want to leave us with, because we were talking about Black girls in education. We have a belief about Black girls which determines how they get treated in the classroom and outside of it. And we have to look at those beliefs and challenge those beliefs. We have to get educated. We have to invest the time in working with Black girls because, in truth, we've looked at every other group, particularly in the public school system. We've never invested the time in looking at how Black girls learn, what Black girls need and want to learn, and who they learn from. We've not invested the time. And if we don't invest the time, we won't see the results. And we have to think outside of the box, not just with Black girls, but with all of our young people. You know, to your point, yes, music, literature, dance, theater, all of these are ways of bringing in education and culture in ways that are going to be interesting for our young people, particularly Black girls, and we need to take advantage of those things. And yes, we need to keep educating ourselves. And the last thing I'm going to say from the trenches is that it is my personal belief that Black girls are natural leaders. And Toni Morrison said in her book Sula, an artist without an art form is a dangerous thing. And a Black girl stripped of her natural native leadership potential becomes somebody's problem, even if she's not a problem. So I think that if we can invest in the Black girl, I think we're going to find that we are investing in the transformation of a world community. And in spite of the fact that she's been overlooked, she's managing to do great things. And I think, yes, to Michael's point, educationally, in higher education, nobody's doing it as well as Black women and Black girls. I can be reached at www.thecoloredgirlsmuseum.com. I can also be reached at the Colored Girls Museum on Facebook. My Gmail address is thecoloredgirlsmuseum@gmail.com. And if you're ever in Philadelphia, you should come and visit the Colored Girls Museum, where in fact we celebrate the ordinary, extraordinary colored girl.
Wonderful. Wow, I am inspired. I want to be back in the classroom today with the talk that you guys have had. Hopefully everyone that's listening will have learned from you and can take some of these tips to heart and apply them and educate others on what they can do to help Black girls in K-12. So I want to thank you all one more time, and thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for sharing it, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for having us.
And if you could
Thank
stay
you.
on for a minute, please.
Okay.